Kelsey Hightower and Kyle Bassett for our Fireside chat.
All right, well, thanks for coming. I thought we had a question already, guys.
All right, we'll take it. We'll start with a question.
So I want to introduce Kelsey. It's pretty cool. We got to get Kelsey to come into Toronto for our first kind of like Google launch event. And I was speaking with Frank one day at the Google office, and we're talking about like, let's run an event, let's kick this thing off. And I had met Kelsey briefly a couple years ago at the first KubeCon that we ever had. It was in Seattle. It was a really small group. It's changed a lot since then.
I hate to inform you, that was not the first
second one?
That was the second one.
Okay.
So you got to remove that from the resume.
I guess. Yeah. You're the only guy who knows it.
Yeah.
So we're
And
gonna
then.
Yeah. But I said, hey, wouldn't it be cool to get Kelsey into town? We're doing so much with containers and Kubernetes. And Frank came back and said, all right, we got him. So we put this event together pretty quick, but great turnout. So Kelsey kind of suggested doing this a little bit differently and maybe talk about like you've been doing a lot of demos and kind of like grinding it out. And a lot of them are on YouTube already, and you've started to do this more of this fireside chat.
Yeah, so the reason why I like this format is because we can ask hard questions and give you the actual real answers, right? My demos tend to work perfectly. And then people say, they go back to their offices and like, I saw Kelsey do this thing, we're going to do it too. And then I show up and like, this is your fault, right? So what we want to do is kind of have a more organic conversation. There are things that actually don't work. A lot of the stuff that you see, you don't need, okay? And we want to make sure that we call out some of those areas that maybe are interesting or look very cool, but don't apply to you, right? And the reason why they don't apply to you too is also as important as why this stuff is cool.
Yeah, and I kind of skipped over the intro, but if you don't know, Kelsey's lived a lot of life as a sysadmin, developer, spent time in financial services, learned that process grind, worked at CoreOS, Puppet, and now I guess staff developing advocate at Google. So what does that mean, being a staff development advocate? It's a little different than the old evangelist title that people used to.
Yeah, I am not an evangelist. And the reason why I say I'm not an evangelist, you can be an evangelist and not know how the thing works and just tell people that they should use it, right? As a developer advocate, at least the way we think about this at Google, a lot of people that build stuff, so I come from a contribution background of Kubernetes and Puppet and various tools on GitHub. And I've had many of the roles that many of you have, whether it's running the team or hands-on keyboards. So I know that a lot of this stuff doesn't work in every context. So as a developer advocate, if I see something and I say, oh, I know how that works because I've touched it. So if I give you the advice that you should probably check it out, it'll probably be with the additional context. I am not going to take a marketing slide and say, you all should use Kubernetes because of bullet point 1 through 4. That makes no sense. And if you're a real developer, you can see right through that. You can be like, he's probably never used that before because there's no way I would use it in that context, right? So I say things that conflict the larger majority of the community. Like, for example, Kubernetes supports stateful workloads. If you ask me, should you run your database on Kubernetes, I would tell you no, right? And I'll have practical reasons based on previous experience why doing that will probably cause more pain than it's worth for most people, right? So that means I'm advocating for the best interests of you. I'm not going to evangelize that you just put everything in Kubernetes because it's cool.
Yeah, cool. And I know you get to spend a lot of time just sharing information. I know one of our customers, I think it was Cassie's here, had replied back in our Slack channel and said, that guy shares information like nobody's business. So I think that's been really cool is to like, I've seen a lot of your talks, but I've watched a lot of them this week just to get a feel for where things stand. But just being able to share information, I try to blog a lot and put out information that we know. And when I have a problem to solve, generally I'm looking for a blog that someone else did it. So how much time do you get to spend like, hidden in the office and actually figuring this stuff out and sharing the information?
So I work from home, and around 4 a.m. is when I get up and write all my code. So any prototypes that you see on GitHub, a lot of them end up becoming production or get forked by someone else because I don't have a lot of time to maintain open source products a lot. But I do have lots of libraries and things that had a decent impact on the industry. So I write code. So if you see me tweet about something or talk about something, it's probably because I used it. And I have a 20-hour rule. I'm not going to talk about something that I haven't used for at least 20 hours. There's the hello world, there's it's broken, can I do it again, and how does this compare to something else that I've used before? and then I can actually talk with a little bit of confidence about the thing that I'm looking forward to. So I'm a bit slow sometimes of seeing something new, and it's like, I gotta touch it first.
Right. Yeah, I think that I've heard you talk about like this learn by doing concept, like this is how we learn, right? Like, install the thing, try it out, let it fail, that's how we know whether we're doing it. So we're gonna start out with a couple icebreakers. We might have already broke the ice a little bit, but these are meant to be like quick, like one-word answers.
Okay.
Yes, no kind of thing. So some of these are a little bit interesting, I think. You won't stop tweeting because you're messing up my phone. So favorite Linux distro could be container or other.
Doesn't matter.
VI, Vim, or Emacs.
Vim.
YAML or JSON.
Oh, back to the text editor. YAML.
Nice.
Is it JSON or JSON?
JSON.
JSON. I think I know the answer to this one, but Go or Python?
Go. Come on.
Yeah. There's lots of Python guys in here.
But Python was my first language, so I have a lot of respect
Before
for
English?
Python. Before English. Yeah.
And then you changed to Go. So
Yeah.
There you go. The future is serverless or microservices?
Neither.
Neither, okay.
Because both of those aren't real concepts to me.
All right, so we'll talk about that a little right after this. Puppet Chef or Ansible?
Oh my goodness. I gotta say Puppet because I've worked there before.
Right. Sure. Is CoreOS better or worse after the Red Hat acquisition?
Ooh. They're better.
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 All right. I'm not allowed to ask why.
Because my friends are richer.
Will Docker Inc. survive? Will it ever live up to its evaluation?
Valuations get to change, right? So I think their original valuation was based on hype. And whenever your valuation is based on hype, if you can't sustain it for 10 years, then that's a problem. I think with the recent move of recognizing that Kubernetes as one for whatever that means, and then meeting the customer there, is a good sign of a healthy business. It reminds me of Red Hat.
Yeah.
When Linux was all you had, Red Hat was there. When OpenStack was the thing, Red Hat was there. When KVM was the thing, or Zen was the first thing.
Yeah.
Then it got bought. Then it became KVM. So if you're going to be an open source company, you better be willing to change when something shows up. And the fact that they're doing that, I think they have a lot more say in their survival than when it was all about Docker branded products only.
So are they too late? You didn't answer the question.
You could say no, but who cares if I say no, right? To me, I think they have enough control that right now the answer is yes until they prove otherwise.
Yeah. Cool. Favorite technology book?
Mine. Kubernetes up and running. No, my favorite technology book is probably the KNRC book. It was the first tech book that was like 100-something pages because they knew what they were talking about. When you know what you're talking about, the book gets smaller, right? And that was my favorite tech book because it taught me that you do not have to build tomes to teach people things.
Right. All right, we got a couple more. Favorite technology podcast?
I don't listen to podcasts, I wouldn't know.
You're just on.
Oh, Scott Hanselman has a really great podcast. He talks about not just hardcore technology stuff, but all aspects of technology. So it's called Hansel Minutes. And yeah, it's pretty good.
Cool. And last one, Star Wars or Star Trek?
Too mean. Star Trek.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually watch it right now on my main laptop. Netflix has about 2 more seasons loaded.
Cool. All right, so we're going to jump into a little bit of the open source talk track, but I think for your benefit, let's survey the audience. This is always fun to do, and we'll see how many people raise 2 hands. But who's on the development side in this room would consider themselves a developer? I love the half hand raise. What about ops? What about the business? We'll look after the business. All right. Pretty good mix. Pretty good mix. So I wanted to start out talking about open source. Like open source has been, I don't want to show my age here, but I've been got to spend my career in open source probably 20 years, and I used to spend a lot of time in the Apache Software Foundation, and I looked at them as like a great foundation to really push things along and a way to incubate projects and a way to put some structure around things. And it gave customers a little more trust in open source. Now this is back when we used to have to like sneak around and do open source. And people would ask you like, what's your middleware stack? And you'd say, well, we run lots of things, right? And we were running Geronimo and stuff back then, and we knew what it was. And you know, when I see the CNCF now, I look at them as this powerhouse, the Linux Foundation, that's really taken that the next level of how to like, I don't want to say productize, but how to really put some structure around open source to help people consume it. They have the whole, you know, Kubernetes is the first like graduate project, and then you look at like the Prometheus and some of the other projects they have underneath them. You know, can you talk about that a little bit and just what you're seeing in the open source space and you know, what you believe in it and how it translates to the old guard, I guess, and how they buy everything.
Yeah, I guess if you think of the old guard is, here's this database product. And if you need a feature, you come to me and I will build a feature for you and charge you more money, right? And I think most people were fine with that, right? I buy your thing, I use it as is, and if everyone stays in that realm, we're fine. Then you get a few customers that break out of the off the shelf and you can't compete with them. They show up and they're not buying everything off the shelf and you're off guard. And the vendor can no longer keep up for you because the vendor relationship at that time is like, hey, my competitor has a mobile app. Can you sell me instant mobile app? And your vendor is like, I cannot. I don't even know what that is. So now you're left on your own, and we see this in the technology cycles where something new shows up, your vendor can't do anything for you, and you're on your own. You do that long enough, and now what we're starting to see is customers building their own thing and sharing it with the rest of the world. So a lot of our key open source projects come from customers sharing their own thing. So like in the financial system or sector, when I was in finance, I remember JP Morgan open sourced their queuing, you know, Cupid, and Red Hat took it over, and then that kind of led to AMPQ, right? This didn't come from a vendor. It's because the bank decided we needed more than IBM MQ series, or the licensing model didn't make sense for every relationship that I wanted to establish. And I think what we're starting to see now is that most banks don't know how to manage, or any company, managing a community is much harder than managing the open source projects, reviewing all the contributions. So then you start to go down the timeline, and companies like CNCF, more importantly, the Linux Foundation probably struck gold first in terms of this mass adoption. They provide this safe place for IP. If you're a customer, to have a voice. The conferences rally the community and allow each of these projects to have their own governance model. So I think now what you're starting to see is that traditional vendors cannot keep up with that pace. So what you kind of need is something where all these logos can live and customers can have a say in their features. So now customers are becoming contributors. So if you want a new feature, you don't have to wait for the vendor anymore. You can hire 2 or 3 people from the community and they can contribute upstream. And now you actually have a better cycle than just a pure vendor relationship.
Right. So do you think the future of open source is going to change very much, or are we now mainstream and it's accepted in the, you know, the incubator style and people contributing? Are we there yet? Or
well, I think since the vendors that had these great relationships with you all have abused it in some ways. When the price goes up and the support doesn't meet expectation, then you kind of lost a little bit of trust. So now I think most customers, when they look at a product, they're going to ask for it to be open source. I don't care who the vendor is, where's the source code in case you go under or you get bought out, or what does the interface look like? I think, and the other one is the extensibility. Most of these things can't be extended, so you're stuck with them for 10 years. It's okay if these things would have been able to be extended over time with proper APIs, proper documentation, and proper community. Since we didn't have all those things, it really feels bad when you're helpless, even though you have the skills and talent, but you can't do anything about it. I don't think everyone wants to go back to that, and I think we say open source to mean APIs, open, and I can control my own destiny. I don't see a reason to retreat.
Yeah, I've had a couple of conversations lately with software vendors, and just to let everybody know, I think we know an API is not a CSV upload of a file.
No.
I love having that conversation. And I think what's important is that we all start to contribute too, and it's important to get involved in these. And sometimes I always, like, maybe it's documentation, maybe it's reporting bugs, maybe it's just getting involved in the community a little bit. It raises us all up, right? That's part of it. One thing I've heard you talk about is the role of like an open source office and how it's the traditional CTO office is changing, and now we're seeing these open source offices, and these are the teams that are meant to go out and almost like harvest the best tech. And there's still a big legal role and all of that in these enterprise customers. But what are you seeing in this new wave kind of open source office or dedicated people looking at it?
So I think we're still in that phase where most people have no experience what it means to collaborate outside of their four walls. Everyone thinks that everything they do is secret sauce. Don't talk about our CI/CD pipeline. It's our secret sauce. It's like, I downloaded this from the internet, and half of this code comes from Stack Overflow. It's not our secret sauce. So I think companies are starting to understand most of that stuff that you do at the tech layer ain't that special, actually. You're probably even doing it wrong. If you would just show someone else, so you can get the independent opinion, it's like, we don't do that anymore. So I think people are having to educate themselves from the legal. So my brother's a patent lawyer, and he has to deal with this thing where people download code and don't understand that there's licenses to this code. You just can't take licensed software and then ship it to your customers if you don't understand the ramifications for companies. The other thing I also have to talk to engineers about is that maybe your company at a higher level has a patent agreement in place with their partners that says that they cannot ship features, even if they're open source, that violate that patent agreement. So these things could be above your pay grade or understanding. This is why you kind of have to have that central council to educate everyone that there's real money on the line with these decisions. And the other piece, I think, is you have to pay attention to how the industry is moving. If you're about to negotiate $1 billion software deal and the open source community has already made it for free, you might want to know that. So having a team that's encouraged to pay attention to what's going on, not heads down, only focusing on your company's problems, I think that goes a long way. And also recruiting talent, going out to these events, looking at, I think in the financial sector, last night I had dinner with a gentleman, I can't recall his name 100%, but open banking. Now most companies get very scared when their industry is commoditized. The first thing they want to do is hide and don't talk about it. And then they watch things progress. But if you have an open source office, then you should just pay attention. First step, go hire all the people in that community so that you become a leader and you can contribute to this new feature if it is going to disrupt your business. There's no reason to hide. It's all open and your customer knows. So I think that's why that office is still important right now, because it's not disseminated across the whole organization yet.
So let's switch gears and talk, get here to talk about, Kubernetes, a hot topic. That's, you're out talking about that all the time. You and I, before we come in here, we had just a quick chat, like, why are we even here? Aren't we all just going to serverless? So, like, why don't we just skip this whole Kubernetes thing and just, like, start the reception early? And I think we had a community question on this that was going to come later, but does this all just lead to serverless? Is containers and Kubernetes all just serverless? So let's level set on that. And if the answer is somewhat no, we'll keep going.
Yeah, so I think the answer is probably no in its current form. So this idea, if I write a piece of code, the whole goal is that we want to reduce the number of steps between writing the piece of code and it being usable. Everything we have so far is thousands of steps. So serverless has this promise that if you conform to this interface, you can have certain events trigger your business logic. So that's very close to what people have in their minds as the ideal state of the world. So the promises of serverless is very early. But it's very promising in terms of getting the friction out of the thing by simply saying, we've learned all this stuff over the last 30 to 40 years. Can that not just be built into the platform? And now that you're starting to see the cloud provider plus open source saying, we will manage all of these best practices for you, and the only thing left at some point will be your code snippet or your container, and we will run it based on the business trigger that's required. That has to happen. People think that that's not coming. It is definitely coming, unless you still are using your punch cards. That's still coming. And right now, we're just in the middle. People are transitioning from the virtual machine-centric world to this container-centric world, but the path heads that way.
Right. So one question I skipped, but now we've kind of said that Kubernetes is the de facto standard. It kind of goes back to my Docker question a little bit, because I think when Kubernetes came out, it was like, wow, like Docker had to really change their game a bit. What has caused that? Is it the open source size of things? And everybody's on the bus now, right? Like there's even the late laggers who said, no, I'm doing my own thing still. Like everybody's got a Kubernetes service now, and some are doing it right, some are, trying. Why is that? Like, why did it become such a standard sort of thing?
So Kubernetes, the name is a label, right? So it's a label for this checkpoint of tech. So if you just put the label to the side, why is Kubernetes ready right now? It's thanks to the ideas of 12-factor, right? Separate your app from the underlying system, right? So now the app becomes a little bit more self-contained. Microservices to an extent, but it also just helps people understand the relationship between their components, not necessarily the deployment pattern. And then comes along Docker, who says, let's challenge some of the best practices around creating a package. There's a jar for the Java world. Python has their own packaging format. Your OS has its own packaging format. And if you look at most of the tools that we built, they're all reassembling the puzzle. Puppet, Chef, Ansible, reassembling the puzzle at deploy time. But then you bring along this Docker tarball thing, and then you put all of your dependencies in it, and then we get closer to what we learned in the mobile space. You go to the App Store, you click the icon, the whole thing installs. There's no wizard, there's no go get the JVM first, it's all self-contained. So now a billion devices can do upgrades and auto-upgrades because we're not dealing with little pieces. So you add all of those steps along the way, plus the cloud, automation, APIs, and all the tools that came with it. If you look at Kubernetes, it's just a label on top of all of those best practices in one system. Use a container as the unit of deployment, so we're not wasting time talking about various languages. Use a declarative API to talk about your desired state, a little holdover from the configuration management world. And all the distributed computing stuff is what most cloud providers had to do underneath anyway. It's what's in Heroku, it's what's in Cloud Foundry. So what we've done is said, like, let's take all of that stuff, and now that we understand it well enough, let's make it an open source project. So this is the new checkpoint. So Linux was the old checkpoint. Kubernetes is this new set of abstractions that makes sense because we've been doing them for so long.
So I know I had this question, but a community question was, is Helm the new app store down the road, these templating concepts? So.
No. So this whole app store, right, we've been talking about this for a long time, reusable apps. You can take this complex piece of software and not understand anything about it and just run it in your infrastructure. And that's all you're going to do. And then it turns out that you got to scale the database. You got to shard the database. Oh, security. Oh, permissions. Upgrades. There's actual data in there. So all this push to deploy business, click a button and then I'm going to get a globally scalable thing for $0. We should just all quit. That doesn't make sense. So I think that those are, to me, are day one tools. Day one, you got it installed, but then day two, how do you debug it? The software isn't perfect yet. So if the software was perfect, meaning once you install it, it did self-healing and self-securing, then yeah, you find a better installer, then the world will be perfect. So I think Helm helps people with I have too many YAML files, even though you should be thinking about generating those YAML files instead of writing the YAML files. So people are trying to use a Band-Aid for maybe a problem they don't need to have. But it's okay, it's a tool that works for a lot of people, but I don't think they really understand the problem it's designed to solve. It doesn't solve we're going to make software self-driving by itself. That's not how all software is built.
Yeah, gets the PM off your back sometime, I guess. To lead into this a little bit, I've heard you talk about the importance of events and data and standards around cloud events and standardizing transports between cloud providers. I saw you do a talk recently that you stood up some stuff in AWS during the talk and you were feeding it to Google. And I think this is kind of I've heard you speak of like Kubernetes as the de facto for compute, but what about events and data? It's not solved yet. What are you seeing in that area? What are your thoughts on that?
So standards, the problem with standards is that there's lots of them, even for the same thing. So the thing I like these days is more about switching costs. So if I'm using something where I can actually use some automation to port it from one thing to another, the switching costs tend to be pretty low. So standardization around like events. So the thing that makes serverless really attractive is that there's some payload that has some context on what you should do. Google has one way of doing it, IBM has one way of doing it, Amazon has one way of doing it. So if you ever want to have all of these things work together, then you got to have a translator for all three or lots of if statements. So now the CNCF has the whole cloud event where we try to take these things and at least have a standard envelope and a standard transport mechanism for them. So that way, even if we are getting events from Amazon or Google, at least we can bundle them in the same envelope, ship them around, maybe have a content type to tell us the difference. Once you start to do that, then we can build libraries that do the transformation for you, right? So maybe there's some commonality between it. And I think that's what's going to be required for the industry to go forward at a larger scale, even on-premise or existing systems. But we can't do that if no one has any standard whatsoever. So we need something to anchor to. So I think that's what's important, that we need to really understand what we're working with. Containers actually took a while to really take off until we got the standards. People were a little nervous about only running Docker containers, right? Well, there'll be an associated cost down the line. And then we had OCI. Now there's a standard, so now you see a plethora of tools. There's different ways of building it, there's different ways of deploying it, securing it, because there's a standard now, so the ecosystem can flourish.
Yeah, I was going to mention the OCI initiative and just seeing standards come out of that. And I think vendors are very much contributing to open source now, so that's their way of saying like, well, I got protection too. And gives us all a lot more freedom and trust that there's not just one person.
Customers are smart too. They look at a great product and they're asking the vendor, when are you going to standardize part of this?
So what's so critical to make all this work together as we evolve from containers into events and services and standards? Is there anything that's critical decisions people need to make right now to set themselves up for the future, or kind of sit and watch?
So we talked earlier about there are problems you don't have. And the analogy I like to use there is when your house is on fire, you call the fire department and they come and they drown your house with water. And you appreciate this, like, thank you. But if your house wasn't on fire, and the fire department shows up and they drench your house, you're like, what the hell was that? Right? I didn't need you to do that. A lot of these technologies, you got to understand what your problem is first. Do you even have this problem? If you can't answer that quickly, then you probably don't need that particular tool. So a lot of people don't look at these things as tools. They get very emotional. Like you see people, they're like, oh, we got Cloud Foundry, I'm on this digital transformation. I'm like, damn, are we in church? Like, what are we doing here? So, and then you say, why did you buy this particular tool? It's like, look, we're digital transformation right now. So, like, we needed the tool, right? It's like, oh, it doesn't make sense. So when logic goes out the window, then you start to end up with, and you raise your hand, you have like 8 or 7 of these things, like where everyone thought it was a good idea over the years, and then you have like 8, like you raise it, like, there's 8 of these things. So you're like, you're transforming, but you're kind of stuck. Like the caterpillar is not quite a butterfly, only has one wing, and it just falls off the tree, right? You don't want that to happen, so you got to make sure that you understand these are just tools. When a better one comes out, you got to evaluate it to your current tool set. If it makes sense, maybe it can replace it, but make sure you understand what the tool is designed to do first.
Yeah, so one question I remember reading last night that someone put in, I didn't have it in my notes, but is when we get into these religious discussions in rooms with different silos of different teams, and someone wants to do one thing and someone wants to do another, like how do we move that along and make decisions without ending up with 8 butterflies with one wing?
So someone needs to make a decision. So when I worked in financial, it was very slow. 8 years ago, everything's risk, PCI, blah, 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 blah. We can't do anything. So eventually someone has to make a decision. So most companies, especially the later years, and it's very unfortunate, all of these companies, when they first started, very ambitious, very risk. You took on a lot of risk to start a company. Everyone's taking risks because that's the only way you're going to survive. And then 20 years later, it's like, let's do nothing else, ever. And the only thing that can push you is out of business. Stock gets cut in half. Competitor shows up. Now you're out of business, and now you're like, all right, now we're motivated. We got to do something because the choice is being removed. So when you don't have that forcing function, most companies will just sit in a room and say, we're going to do this POC, it's going to be 18 months, and blah, blah, blah. And then you actually promote the person before they've done anything. Like, that was a great doc you wrote. You're now the VP of the thing you said in the last
digital transformation.
Yes. So I think what you have to do, what I used to do managing teams, even in this environment, we're going to go on the whiteboard. We're going to actually do something. So if you have suggestions, we're going to put it on the whiteboard. The next thing is, are you willing to be responsible? Are you willing to actually do something? You can't just say, this sucks, but I'm not going to do anything. If that's you, then you don't get to come to the next meeting because you're just saying things sucks. That's the easy part. So the people at your organizations, even if they don't have the right title, because I see that too much, you're not the VP of X, so you can't make decisions. Yeah. When you find someone with the willingness to actually execute, you got to put them in a position to succeed, period. And when they fail, you need to give them the cover they need, period. That's it. That's all you can do. So traditionally, you try to buy it, you call Accenture, and you make them responsible. The SOW, and they do it, and you say, oh, Accenture failed, right? That's easy. But now, that's not an option for all of you and for every single project. Now you actually have people that work for you that you have to extend the same opportunity. Be real clear about what they want to do, statement of work, and then give them the space to actually do it, and then hold people accountable. Yes, you failed. But that's okay, because we've learned something along the way. But none of this meeting for 18 months.
Yeah. So that sounds a lot like culture to me, I think, right? So we'll rapid fire some stuff. I'm gonna throw a bunch of questions at you, and you can let us know. So one of them we got from the community was, one of the challenges people are having is they built a Kubernetes stack, maybe it's OpenShift or something on-prem. And now they need a cloud version, right? And GKE is a great solution. GKE is fully managed. I don't have to worry about any of those buttons of kicking servers or anything. But if I need both, I still got to manage the one on-prem. So that's one version of the question. And then the other one I'd like to lead into that is the promise of Kubernetes and federation. And I spent a lot of time with customers that want this, when we got started, they wanted this perfect, like I need to deploy to 2 clouds, I need all my secrets in all places, I need everything. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just start with one. Like, no, we got to have a plan for both before we start. So I always said, Kubernetes is 18 months away, guys, let's get started with something. I see it being deprioritized a little bit in the community, and then if we move into like concepts of Istio, it starts to have overlap and stuff. And the demo I did this morning was really just down to the old style of like Jenkins and double deployments into 2 clusters like out an API. So that's a bunch of stuff, but I'm sure you have an opinion on it, and I'd like to hear a little bit of the future of federation. So I think it's
So this idea of federation, and some people used to call it multi-cloud, or just buzzword.
I had that on my title.
There you go. You had multi-cloud.
Oh yeah.
You used the buzzword.
Yeah.
Okay. So this idea that I want to be able to compute in 2 places. That's all you're talking about. I have this on-premise thing, and we bought some stuff, and we collected some stuff over the years. And there's this cloud provider over here, and they spent reportedly $20 billion on infrastructure. And we bought some stuff, and we spent about $1 million. And they spent $20 billion. But what I want is parity between these 2. And so the customer will come to me and say, Kelsey, we want what you have on-prem. I'm like, well, that would be like going to the airport and saying, wow, look at that Boeing 777. Look at it, the wings. It's amazing. You go in, first class cabin. I want one of those myself. And so, I'll give it to you for free. And if I give it to you for free, you take it to your subdivision and you're knocking roofs off houses. And you will it into, because you got to actually have something that pulls them right to the engine.
Oh, yeah.
So this thing's now in your driveway, your wife pulls up, like, what the hell is that? She's like, I got a plane. Do you know how to fly? No, but I got one, okay? I don't know what to do with these things. And the maintenance of these things are crazy. You gotta have a hangar, and everyone has a specialty, but you don't have any of these people. But you got the thing. So all of this, it's not even an on-prem versus cloud. It's that you don't have the infrastructure to keep up with where this stuff is. But then you still want to have a conversation about on-prem. You can do on-prem. The only requirement is get $5 billion, buy all of this stuff, hire all of these people. Then we can talk about the software that those people will take. Remember, Google, 18 years to get to this point. 18 years, a multi-billion dollars per year spend. Right? We run underwater sea cables to connect the continents because the latency can't be too high. It's multi-billion dollars to run under. You got to get a submarine. You can't rent those. Okay? You can't get a submarine easily. So when people start to understand that these 2 environments, that you're not willing to invest, because it doesn't really make sense for everyone to invest multi-billion. So this is where this whole cloud thing comes from. It's like centralized infrastructure, like the freeway. Are you going to go build a freeway before you start driving? It doesn't make sense to you. But I think there's a holdover from all the years of we bought some stuff and we got by when things were low scale. Now the world has changed a little bit. So federation comes out. Kubernetes gives you hope. OpenStack gave you hope. You try it, it's like, okay, this isn't like the other thing. Now Kubernetes comes out and you sit it on top of infrastructure in 2 places. And for the most part, you do get something very similar. You can run apps, you can do some ML stuff. So you start to say, all right, what about storage? Can I do a magical federation where if I have a database here, magically the data is replicated on the other side? That's a hell no. Networking. What are you going to use? You need a third-party load balancer that's not in either of these places so that you can send traffic to both places. You got that? And most of the promises from Federation try to combine all of these concerns into one product that no one's ever used before. So when you try to use it, it doesn't work. The database, turns out, needs to know about the data that's being moved back and forth. You can't just snapshot a point. Then you have this laws of physics. You can't just move a terabyte of data over your internet connection. This ain't Netflix. We're not streaming videos, right? This is real data. So I think a lot of people didn't understand that federation really was about lots of individual concerns, security, storage, networking, and so forth. So Kubernetes only solves a common API for compute. But then you need to think about all the other layers, and this is why I think most people need to be a little bit more pragmatic. So multi-cloud, if you put that to the side, I think what really works for people that's real, if you like Google's BigQuery offering, you're going to move your data there so you can use BigQuery. If you like Amazon's SQS offering because you're doing something with their pricing data, you're going to move your compute near that particular offering. That's the only thing that makes sense. You need to go where the offerings are. If you're completely commodity, then yeah, maybe you can use all the commodity stuff everywhere. But that's the reality, and that's, I think, is where actually people end up.
Yeah, so quickly, what about like, well, I mean, I can't trust you with my data because I got a pass card on my door, and that's safer than putting my data in the cloud. So how are we going to come back to the conversation? How do we convince people to like use common sense and get put compliance and officers and all that get in the way, right? So it's holding us back. I mean, it certainly is.
So this is where you have this. I used to be in those meetings, right? I used to print out the PDF for all these standards and read them. Like half the stuff people are saying are not actually recommended. It's just something people made up. But if you think about security now, and you see this with the auditors, if I walk into, and I worked in financial, if I walk into the data center, you probably even label the database. It's probably labeled.
It's got a sticker on it.
Got a sticker on it.
Ludo.
This is the one that if you compromise, it's over. We have great security. It's like, dude, where do you get your libraries from? And if you ask the developers the truth, they pull them from the internet. No, we have a proxy. We go through Nexus. Internet. You have not read all the code that you rely on. You haven't done it. Don't lie. You haven't done it. So the backdoors are just in memory. So all your firewalls, all your InfoSec, I'm coming in on port 443 HTTPS, straight to the memory, and I'm going to take your data all the time. So you look at the security posture, what you're really doing in your data center, it's probably not that great. When I go to our exec briefings, they say, hey, in the Google data center, if you crash a tank through the data center and you hold all the employees hostage, we have a kill switch and all the data is rendered useless. You can take all the servers you want, you can boot them all. If you move them, we know that they've been moved. And I go to your data center and you're like, yeah, that's the Oracle thing. And that one has the credit card. There's the encryption device right there. This one. That one. So if I take the cable out, that's where I have the cable back. So that's your story. So as you're, think about an auditor in the future. They visit a Google Cloud data center and like, wow, you mean you chunk up even 100 meg file into thousands of pieces with individual keys wrapped up, and the customer key wrapped around that. And if you give us your own key, we wrap it again. And you have a system that automates this. Wow, you do that for everything, everything. And I go there and you're like, yeah, we bought this thing from RSA that we encrypt the file over, I can't put my stamp knowing that there's something better. And again, this is not a ding against you as an engineer, as a person trying to make all this stuff work. It's just that you don't have the same capital. You don't have the same tools to compete with the new threats. And the new threats are getting more sophisticated. Right? So the minute someone gets a quantum computer and starts cracking your encryption, everything you bought from the vendor will be rendered useless. And you can't wait till that happens. And we know, this is why we have one. You need to understand that the threat will change. No one is actually looking for, hackers are not using a LTS release of their hacking tools. Right? They're not looking for stability. Okay?
So, I mean, so that we've rendered like, okay, we'll trust the data center. And then it, I've seen you talk a little bit about like, let's be honest, apps are getting compromised at the app level. We did talk this morning on secret management and automating keys, implementation expiring. And a lot of projects we're doing is I find when we go into the cloud, there is so much question and scrutiny that I think we are doing a way better job because we do have the greenfield mindset and we're able to kind of start over a little bit. And then it forces us to kind of craft standards also, so when the next guy comes along, it's like, okay, well, here's how we did things. Is this good enough? And so I think that's helping a lot too. And hearing other companies move stuff into GCP and leverage services is also give other people a little bit more comfort doing it.
Yeah, I want to make sure we're not talking cloud versus on-prem. Like, I use a bank because I don't want to put my money in a mattress and then lose it all. So I like to put it in a bank because they seem to be pretty good at it. Right? I can go in and check my balance, I can transfer, and things have been reliable ever since I've been using the bank. I don't want to build my own bank just for me and my family. It sounds like a crazy idea. But then when it comes to infrastructure, people are like, hey, we don't know what we're doing, but we're going to do it anyway. And it's like, not everyone needs to do that over time. So this is not a war against on-prem versus cloud. Just understand that there is another group of people who are extremely focused in one area, just like you're extremely focused in your business. When you go out and sell your business, you're telling your customer, we do that really, really well, and you should trust us with that. The cloud is the same way. We are really, really, really good at this, or we want to be good at this. And some of our customers help us be good at this. A lot of banks understand how to manage data in a safe way. We're just bringing tools to meet you where you're at. We don't know everything. We just try to bring tools that actually take care of the technical side of that. And you deal with the cultural business side of managing that data. So it's a relationship.
Okay. So I think we're running a little low on time, right? So I'm going to tell some of the questions I was thinking of asking. They can become hallway discussions for other people. And then there's a few community questions we should cover. And then we'll hit up our lunch and stuff like that. Like, I'm very surprised I didn't get through all the questions I had listed today, but we got the rest of the day. So some of the other questions was a little stuff around Istio and security requirements and this whole privilege thing. I think we all should start thinking about that. This promise of like Istio is really cool. Like, what are the real use cases? And us bringing use cases to the community is critical so people can build these features. There's a question around Apogee and where it fits in, but we'll go, and then there's a whole talk track on security, container security. We're not going to get to ML or AI right now, but I'll do a couple of questions from the community. We covered some of them, but I heard you say, people ask, has Kubernetes become too complex? Is it too complex to manage? And I've heard you say, everything's complex if you don't understand it, and it goes back to your conversation around just try things, start and experiment with them. So, I mean, with that, is Kubernetes, is there too many pieces to it? Is it getting too complex?
So the Linux kernel is far more complex than Kubernetes. The stuff that you got to do to talk to a hard drive and write data to this, some people still have rotating devices, or the controllers on an SSD, that is complex. Most people don't understand it. The physics of a CPU and assembly language is complex, but you believe you understand it. You write your scripts, you run your commands, so you believe over the 10-year period that you're now comfortable with these arcane commands that most people who've never seen a Linux setup will be like, how does this even work? So Kubernetes is new. And now we've kind of entered this world of, if I can't get it in 5 minutes, it must be complicated. It's like, are you kidding me? That's the day one problem. Kubernetes solves the day 2 and 3 problem by putting the complexity and highlighting it very clearly. We have etcd for consistent storage of data, so it has built-in replication. We have a scheduler that takes in different things that you may want to do, and it grows over time. We separated all the components so that they can fail individually and scale individually by design. We have a very clean API between all the components. So people see all this specification and say, oh, why do you have so much? Why couldn't this just be one binary where everything's baked in? Okay, what if the database falls over? We're going to take down the whole system? Oh, that would be bad. So day 1 sometimes prohibits day 3 from even existing. So Kubernetes weathered the whole day 1 storm. This is when Docker was saying, oh, Swarm is much easier. All these things are easier, but those things died off when we came to day 3. You tried all these POCs, and then you put load on it, and it falls over. And you say, all right, it's time to move on. And then you start to respect Kubernetes for day 3. So I think people have to understand that we're engineering people. If you're going to build something for the long haul, slow down, be patient, understand why the decisions are there. Even if you don't want to use it, understand why you said no. You can't say, I read this blog post, and it said Kubernetes is too complex. You can't download it, run it on your laptop, and say, oh, I couldn't run my application in 5 minutes, therefore it's too complex. You need to actually do the research to understand what the moving pieces are, understand why they're there, and then make an informed decision. So I think we're a bit spoiled with this whole download, buy, it should work in 5 minutes relationship. and not respecting the idea that, you know what, Kubernetes is extendable. So if you need to do something really, really complex, there's a clean API for you to extend it. You will appreciate that 2 years from now. So I think people got to understand what they have at their disposal. Just like Linux, it enabled things like Android, it enabled things like the cloud and virtualization, and it's extremely complex. But then it will go away over time with these managed providers.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do 2 more questions. The only one thing on that is what I like to see also is when you get to 1.5, I start looking at release notes. They start to get a little boring. It's a good sign.
Yes.
It shows we're getting stability and little bug fixes, but we're not. These release notes aren't these packages and packages, so it just shows the whole stability thing. So we'll cover off maybe 1 or 2 more questions, maybe 2 more questions. But I've heard people say you have a pretty extensive GitHub repo, and one of them is not so extensive. So what's the story behind the no-code GitHub repo you put up here? Is that have you proven a point with that? Is that a...
That was a joke that I didn't even think would actually be anything. So I was in the airport, my flight got delayed, and everyone keeps writing code for no reason. It's like, why are you doing that? That already exists. Or you could actually just use Nginx instead of trying to build that from scratch. Or some people will describe what they're building, and you're like, you know what that is? That's called DNS. And they're like, no, it isn't. Our thing, you can put an IP, get a name, and it will resolve the name. I'm like, yeah, man, DNS. So the idea behind no code, so I was going to just do a tweet, no code is better than blah, 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 or code is alive. So I said, no, I'm just going to write a GitHub repo about no code, and I have this framework about if you write no code, it's easy to deploy, it's easy to scale, easy to add new features, you won't have any problems and it'll be secure. So I post this thing, and then people lost their minds and started filing issues that the product doesn't work, or that, I don't know. So if you read the issue, it's hilarious as hell. And I did a keynote recently on no code to show people, walk them through the tutorial. So this is fun, but the message there is that people run to the keyboard way too fast. Slow down. Draw on the whiteboard what you're trying to do. Ask someone, does this look crazy? Listen to them. You don't have to argue all the time. The best engineers figure out how to solve problems without writing any code. No more liabilities. Reduce the liability. If you can delete code, you probably know what you're doing. Everyone keeps adding code. It's like, dude, you just duplicated this function over here. Oh, didn't see it. Now we have 2. So you gotta do a little bit better. So that whole no code is the extreme opposite end of what we're doing to force people to think a little bit.
Cool. So I'll wrap it up. I think Wood's gonna run out in the fire also, so we better get some lunch. But what excites you over the next year, both personal and your work life? What are you looking forward to get excited about?
So I'm a minimalist. I know every item that I own. I know them all, right? I can probably fit them in a very small bag. Not the same for my wife and daughter, but they're getting there. But as a minimalist, the things around me, I don't really care about fancy things too much. It doesn't bother me. So I get to use most of my energy to think about things like respect and treating people nice, because I'm a very happy person. So it's easy for me to treat other people with respect. And the other thing that I've done is thought about minimalism in my technology and the way I think about things. So personally, I also delete some of the streams that are just noise. Containers versus serverless, noise. Don't even think about it. No need for me to even join that conversation. So reducing that kind of thing helps me to stay focused on things that actually matter and become humble. I don't have any battles that I need to win. Whether you use Kubernetes or not doesn't actually matter. I actually learned all of those systems. So for me, it's very liberating not to try to die on these temporary hills that come and go. So I really look forward to that. And then I think there's also now a renaissance of other people using their brains again. You can't buy your way out of every solution. So now customers like me that are traditional enterprises, when they show up, they actually have diagrams now saying, this is what we want to do. Here's our research so far. And they're being a little bit more vulnerable to say, here's the areas we don't know. Now that we have people that are open-minded and thinking, now we can actually make progress. So seeing these same customers that were pure buyers before now contribute to these projects. Or I'll show up and I get impressed too. They show me the way that they're doing things. I'm like, wow, that's new. I've learned something. That to me is a very healthy world that I want to live in, where not just a few people are pushing things from the mountaintop. Everybody's contributing and sharing ideas, and that's the world that I can live in.
Cool. Well, really appreciate you coming to our city. you selected not winter, so that was a good choice. But I think everyone appreciates just your community side and just your way of thinking and stuff. And I think we all learned a lot hopefully today, and we'll mingle today. And everybody enjoy the labs. I think Mike's going to kick things off, and we're going to grab some lunch and stuff like that. But I really appreciate it, Kelsey.